enjoy it.
Welcome to episode 2, the Strings edition of the Music Hall podcast, the show where we talk about all things AU music, bringing you music and news that's fresher than the floorboards in room 219.
We're your hosts, Isabelle
And Nina
from AU Winds and Percussion and AU Strings.
It is so good to be back.
Oh my gosh, I was waiting for forever for this episode. I'm so excited.
Yeah, the strings episode, which I'm super excited about because, as you know, I am a string player myself, a violinist. I've also shamefully dabbled in viola, but that's only because the demand for violas are so high, but no one wants to. And I swear it has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
Not easier than
I believe you. Yeah, I've touched the trumpet once in my life, so I understand. Anyways.
Anyways, I think that we are both extremely excited for the features and guests this episode.
You're all excited for a whole bunch of bad puns, too.
Oh, I should be worried, shouldn't I?
We'll see. Anyways, let's get into it.
For this episode, we have invited 4 very special guests from our very own senior AU strings class. Here are Alpha, Christine, Abigail, and Victoria.
Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
So nice having all of you guys here today, and thank you guys again for joining us. The first question that we have is for Alpha. So what is your favorite musical recording? And who is the performer and what piece is it?
Yeah, I gotta say my favorite one is the Schindler's List theme by Jacques Perlman. Yeah, it's a great piece.
Good choice.
Nice. When do you start playing your instrument, and what was your favorite, and what was your first instrument of choice, Christine?
I started playing the violin when I was 6 years old, and I would have to say that, the violin was my first choice.
Okay, and for the both of you, in order to amass a number of good jokes, what is the best viola joke that you've heard?
For me, probably the one that where this brass player asks this trumpet player, "Why do you put your trumpet inside of a viola case?" And then they say it's for theft protection.
I have too many morbid ones, but I gotta say the best one that's appropriate for the podcast is how does a violist's brain cell die? Alone.
Let's move on to our speed round, huh?
All right, so chamber music or orchestral music?
Chamber? It's kind of hard to choose, but yeah, it's a chamber.
Chamber, I'd say.
Have you ever played viola?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, right. So did you have to learn piano as a kid, either of you?
Yes.
Not as a kid. It was pretty recent, but I did do piano earlier for the for the ARCT requirements.
I see.
Okay, here's a controversial one. Milk or cereal first?
Milk first.
Dang.
No, did I say milk? I'm sorry, I meant cereal first.
Dang.
We'll move on now to Abigail and Victoria, who are in grade 12, and we will be asking them some questions about their instruments and their preferences. So Abby, what is the most difficult thing that you've faced this year, either musical or otherwise?
The most difficult thing I faced this year is probably the complexity of accessing certain musical resources during quarantine. So for example, if I need to get repairs or accessories, like my bow right now, which still needs a rehear, but I haven't been able to get it reheared. Also, the fact that I can't play beside everyone in orchestra in real life, that's been a difficult thing to accept.
Yeah, that's honestly the worst part of, all of this is not being able to play in person. And yeah, in terms of repairs, I haven't changed my strings in a long time, so thank you for reminding me.
Has there ever been a time where you thought you broke your instrument, Victoria?
Yeah, so in grade 9, my cello, one of the seams had actually split. So when that happens, like your cello or violin or whatever, it starts creating like a buzzing noise. So that was pretty annoying. I didn't really realize until my cello teacher had told me. So yeah, but now I learned that you have to like keep your instrument in like the proper humidity and everything. So
Mm-hmm.
that was
Are
not
your
a
instruments
fun-
not supposed to buzz?
like they're supposed to more like ring, not buzz. It sounds like more of like a B, like or
Oh,
phi when
I
the seam splits. So that's not a good thing.
All
yeah,
right.
it's got like I feel like although my violin isn't splitting at the seams, it like if your string or something isn't properly wound or if it's, you know, deteriorating, it makes weird noises and it can be quite uncomfortable or harsh to listen to. So yeah, that's a very important tip for anyone who has a wooden string instrument, especially. So, do you guys think that playing a wind instrument or a string instrument is harder?
I'd say string. I'm probably more biased because I do play string instrument, but I
Wow.
see why like wind instruments could be a little bit more difficult. While you don't have to like, you know, your fingers don't have to use like muscle memory, like breath control and everything is really like important. But I don't know. I still think that the, you know, string instruments are a little bit more challenging.
Maybe so. Dang, I actually don't know though, because I don't really have experience with wind instruments. I guess for me, I mean, I could say string instruments are harder, but I can also say like wind instruments definitely have their own difficulties. I think it's just that the difficulties between both are different between the two. Yeah, I can't say, but I think yeah, it's that.
There are definitely certain factors and other things that you have to regard when comparing the instruments, and both are very hard.
Have you guys ever played a viola?
Well, I have,
I
but
know too much.
I may or may not have played the viola at one point in time, but we don't talk about that.
I
have never really played one. I've touched one, of course, but
touched one. Oh, geez.
You've been infected with the viola touch.
You wash your hands.
Right. Gotta wash your hands thoroughly after that one.
Yeah.
Disinfectant, of course.
Right.
All right. Did you have to learn piano as a kid?
Yes. I quit the piano for the cello, which my mom did not like, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I did play the piano, and I guess I have very fond memories of the piano, so yeah, I do like it very much.
That's good. That's nice. And I know you are an incredible pianist, so it's very cool that you can play 3 instruments: violin, piano, and viola. The world must know.
I'm very flattered. Thank you.
You just exposed her like that? Wow.
No, she exposed herself.
All right. Here's a controversial one. Milk or cereal first?
Obviously cereal. If you choose the other way around, you're obviously like
well, in my defense, when I was a kid, I'd come down for breakfast and my dad would have a bowl of milk prepped for me, and he'd tell me however much cereal I prefer. So I'd say I've kind of grown up getting used to milk before cereal.
Anyways, thank you guys all for coming and being a part of our podcast this week,
this month,
this episode. How do you guys hang in the strings room all the time? Whenever I go in, I always get the chills.
You know, I could say the same about the band room, but I guess it's just because we're used to it.
What do you mean? Like, but I always feel like someone's watching me, like, whenever I go in. It's weird. Like, there's always, like, a shadow in there, in, like, the corner.
Oh, you know what? That's probably just Scary Larry.
Huh?
Scary Larry was a regular guy whose name was simply Larry. He was a teacher, and he also was a musician. Sometimes he played hockey, sometimes he marked tests, and most of the time he played the viola. It wasn't a huge deal, you know. His vibes were always a little bit off because he played the viola, but nobody thought that he was, you know, strange or peculiar. He was just an ordinary guy. He loved his viola and he played it to his heart's content, much like any other musician with their own instrument. And, the shocking thing is that he actually made the viola sound decent. Until one day, he showed up to the strings room of the UHS building, only to find his viola on the ground, broken, shattered, with no chin rest, let alone a shoulder rest. That would leave anyone who played it with chronic neck pain, crippling tendonitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, cubital tunnel syndrome, highway tunnel syndrome. And that broke his heart. Sometimes on the rare, or actually pretty common occasion that the music hall is empty, you can hear him play his broken viola, haunting the place. They say that any string player who's unfortunate enough to hear him play or to encounter him in the shadows is cursed with bad intonation and terrible technique for the rest of their lives. Additionally, they're chained forever to a viola case. And that is the legend of Scary Larry.
I've never been more glad to play the trombone in my entire life.
Our next guest is the concertmaster of several orchestras, including the Mississauga Symphony Orchestra, Orchestra Toronto, the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir Orchestra, and many more, as well as a renowned soloist, chamber musician, and teacher in the GTA. In recent years, AU Strings has had the pleasure of receiving a masterclass from him and playing for him in music festivals.
Without further ado, here is Corey Gemmell.
Very nice to meet you guys.
Very nice to meet you too, Mr. Gemmell.
So?
We'll start off with some long questions. How did your musical journey begin? And did you plan on studying or teaching music?
So I started fairly old, probably, for most performing violinists. I started when I was about nine and a half, just before my 10th birthday. I'm originally from Hamilton, and many years ago, when I was that age, they had a strings program where you could pay $100 for the year and you had weekly group lessons. And if you completed your year, you got to keep your violin, which was obviously not a very expensive instrument, but it got me started. And that's how I began. And I began private lessons a few years later. I came from a family that was not quite so well off, so money was always a bit of an issue. But I managed to get some private lessons finally when I was in high school. And I fell in love with it right away. The idea of pursuing it professionally, both in terms of performing and teaching, that possibility perhaps didn't present itself quite so early. That sort of took hold as the years went by. And for a long time, I actually thought I wanted to go into science, some sort of science vector with my life and my career. And that enjoyment of things like that never really left me, but the violin simply took hold. And then I went to the University of Toronto. I studied with a violin professor there by the name of David Zafer. He actually just passed away not too very long ago, unfortunately. And then I also had lessons with Jose Luis Garcia there, a few visiting guest artists, etc. And I stayed there. Around that time, too, while I was pursuing my undergraduate degree, I was starting to teach. I actually started to teach at some high schools. I had a few friends that were music teachers, so I was going in and doing some coaching, some teaching, and sort of got my feet wet with that a little bit and figured that I enjoyed that as well. So I continued with that the entire time I was in university. I stayed at U of T and I did a master's degree, and that was pretty much it. I mean, by that point, I was fairly hooked and into it.
All right.
That sounds like a very, very interesting journey. And despite starting late, I think that you have certainly been able to accomplish just as much, if not more, than a lot of violinists who started earlier than you. So our next question is, did you ever have an aha moment or like a light bulb moment in terms of your career or your music? I know you talked about how you got into teaching. Did you have any other like sort of moments where you just knew that something was right or something that you discovered?
That's actually a very smart question. So I have a few answers for that. The first answer actually might be a little surprising. So when I went to university and started studying with Professor Zafer, by that point I was quite far behind. I mean, despite finding a very good teacher in high school, I simply started very late. And when I was in university, talk about an aha moment. I remember that halfway through my second year, my aha moment, I had two of them in a row. One of them was, I think I'm not going to do this anymore. And it was a very difficult year. It was just too many things, just too far behind. And sort of had a little bit of a blow up with my professor over it, because I just didn't think I could take it anymore. It was a lot of pressure. And yeah, it just seemed like it was a goal that was very, very far away and too far away. I remember so clearly to this day, many years later, that I went home at Christmas, at the Christmas break, talked about it with my own family, came back, then I had my blow up with my professor, and that was the second aha moment. And for whatever reason, at that point, perhaps it was more of a commitment after that blow up and after that almost crash. But at that point, things started to work, and things sort of started to come together. And those aha moments continued after that. I'm past that point, sort of discovering about yourself as how you want to be as a violinist, what your goals are. And I don't mean goals sort of in tangible things like you want to play with this group or play that or play this, but just in terms of your own satisfaction with your instrument and what you would like to sound like, what you would like to achieve just on a very personal level. That started to come together. And as that came together, then that sort of set some ideals and some standards in terms of what I would like or expect from my students, what I would like to hear from people. And so you start to gather your own identity as a performer. You start to put that together, and performing and teaching are kind of interlinked in that respect. So maybe if that answers that question of aha moments. That was probably the biggest one. You have many small aha moments if you suddenly figure out that a better way of shifting or a better way of vibrating or moving or holding the bow. And those aha moments still continue. I practice religiously to this day. I'm still on the fiddle hours a day and still changing things all the time, constantly, like a mad scientist, looking for more aha moments on the instrument and looking for new and improved, better ways of doing things. And then, of course, as I find those moments for myself, whether those moments lead to something better or sometimes you realize that that's not a very good path to go down and it doesn't work, well, then, of course, that helps you and assists you when you're coaching and teaching other people, because you have your own experience of journeying down certain paths, and you can pass that along to students and coach people so that they perhaps don't spend time going down a pointless journey when you've already done that for them.
Oh, okay. That was really insightful, actually. For our next question, it's kind of personal-ish. What are your best and worst performances you've ever done, in your opinion?
My best and my worst.
Spicy.
Sometimes they're almost one and the same. So one of them that I had not too long ago, I had a phone call about 3 years ago on a Thanksgiving Monday, and it was from a conductor, a good friend of mine, of Mississauga Symphony. And I remember I just put my children to bed. My wife was away on tour. She's also a violinist. And he called up and he said that a soloist had canceled for an upcoming performance that was a Monday on a Saturday, 5 days away, of the Sibelius Violin Concerto. And I said, that's really unfortunate. And I didn't really get what he was driving at first. He said, can you think of any people that could jump in and do that? And the Sibelius, if you guys have played that, is not exactly an easy, it's not like picking up a Vivaldi concerto. So I said, I gave him a couple of names, and he said, yeah, we've kind of looked into it. It doesn't really seem possible. It's, people either want too much money or it's too much exposure. So I said, okay. And he said, what about yourself? And I used some expressions I won't use on our podcast right now, and I hung up on him. And a couple hours later, he called back, Anyway, I did it. Was the long and the short of it. And it was kind of a mixture of both. I mean, I was very unhappy with what I did, but at the same time, it came off just fine. It went actually quite well, but it was a source of frustration because 5 days to put that back together. I had played it with orchestra, but not in the previous 10 years. So I had 5 days to put that together. And so it was both a moment that I was very proud of, to be a little selfish and to be a little not very humble about it. It certainly felt like a bit of a badge of honor to do it. But at the same time, and it went well, it was received well. At the same time, though, you're intensely dissatisfied because how much detail and polish can you put into something in 5 days? So it was a moment of both. And one of those things that hopefully I never have to do. Well, actually, I did have to do that again. A few months later, I got contacted for another orchestra. And again, it was the Sibelius Concerto. And Michael Remini of Remini House of Music called me, and he had some affiliation with this other orchestra. And apparently their different soloist, same concerto, had canceled. And that was about 3 weeks' notice. So I had a few more days than the first time. And he had heard what I did with the one orchestra. So hopefully I don't have to do Sibelius Concerto ever again in my life. I think I'm done with that one.
Yeah, I've actually had the pleasure of playing in orchestra as accompaniment for that concerto, and I've listened to that concerto so many times. I've sight read it, but have never actually learned it properly because it is so challenging and so intimidating. And I think it's incredible how you were able to put together a performance in 5 days, even though it wasn't, up to your standard, but still perfect after so long. That's really incredible.
Perfect.
So the next question that we have for you is based on current times, and it's how has the pandemic sort of influenced your music playing or your career?
Well, the short answer to that one, well, actually, there's two answers. The short answer to that one would be, well, the obvious one is that it's impacted it very negatively. I mean, there are no performances. We've had some opportunities. Last November, some organizations resumed work, and I did some live streams. In fact, I did one early on in the pandemic from the University Club at U of T. I did jointly with a cellist and a pianist, and I did the complete A minor sonata unaccompanied of Bach. So I did that, and then there was really nothing else because we were shut down. I'm able to teach over Zoom. That was I'm sure you guys have experienced. It's quite a learning curve trying to either teach or learn over this, over the computer and over the internet. So huge learning curve with that. Some other organizations started to resume, and then I did actually a movement of Beethoven Violin Concerto. The last movement was live streamed in November. I did some Vivaldi with orchestras, and then we were shut down.
Oh.
And then there was some more stuff supposed to take place, and we just got shut down again. So, you have this roller coaster, and I'm certainly not, by far, I'm not the only one experiencing that. So you're kind of on, you're off, you're on, you're off. It hasn't been all bad, though. In many ways, and especially it was a discovery with students, it's not that bad teaching over the internet. Many things that we take for granted. For example, if you're learning something with your teacher and they want to correct your intonation, what do they usually do? Well, they play alongside with you. And it's a little bit of a shortcut. We do it all the time when we're in person. You can't do that over Zoom or FaceTime because we can't play simultaneously. So you learn the skill of verbally directing somebody, or the person has to actually stop, listen to you demonstrate, and then they have to replicate it. And while it's a more cumbersome process, I'm actually finding in some ways it's a more thorough process because it forces the student to use those skills that they would otherwise simply take for granted and rely on the crutch, of somebody playing along with them. So it hasn't been all that bad. There's some other things too. My wife and I invested in some microphones, green screens and stuff, and we have a number of video and recording projects that we've just started to put together for some things, and learning how to use software such as Logic Pro or Final Cut Pro and different editing and stuff. And that's actually been kind of interesting. It's allowed us, and certainly myself, to explore some areas of performing and recording and listening back that we otherwise wouldn't have. As a professional musician, you end up on a little bit of a work treadmill where you end up taking, if somebody calls and says, are you available for this concert? You check your calendar and yes, indeed I am. Great, you're doing it. And sometimes we stack things so heavily, you know, you end up going from one rehearsal to a different rehearsal to another rehearsal to a couple of students to a performance all in one day. And you don't realize sometimes that you're not necessarily taking the time to work on yourself as a player in the same way that we have the time now. So it hasn't been all that bad. I mean, of course, you know, financially, everybody's taking a huge hit. But I like to think of that I'm actually coming out of this a much better player than when I went in. So, you know, that sort of mad scientist experimenting and seeing what you can come up with and paying more attention to things has been actually very beneficial. Of course, I'd rather be back playing, but I'll come out of this, I think, a better player and teacher than I went into it. So it could have been a lot worse.
That's kind of inspiring, honestly. Like everything's been so crap for like the entirety of 2020 and now we're in 2021. For our last long question, I wanted to ask, what has been your inspiration over the years?
In terms of like who has inspired me as players?
Anything, honestly.
Anything. Well, that's a complicated question. As you said, it's a long question. So I think it's sort of multifaceted. As far as inspiration from other players, I have to say I really enjoy old performances, like performances and recordings of bygone eras. Every once in a while I nerd out on the Bell Telephone Hours series. I don't know if any of you have ever watched that. I'm sure it's available on YouTube. Bell Telephone in the early days of television used to sponsor an hour of live programming, and they actually brought in violinists like Yehudi Menuhin or Henrik Schering. They would interview them, and then they would perform maybe a movement of a famous violin concerto with a live orchestra. It's unedited, and you just see them play, and then you hear them talk. I love that kind of playing because it's so honest. You're just getting a one take. It's not edited, and a lot of our modern recordings, everything is fake. We can fix every little note. You can fix every little glitch, anything you don't like. And in those days, it was what you heard was what you got. And I love that. You hear some just tremendous playing from these people. So I love going through some of that old material, and it's amazing what those people could pull off. I'm not sure that as great as players are nowadays, I'm not sure some of them really have the stamina to pull off with the courage that those fellows and ladies used to have to be able to do what they did. So I find that very inspiring. Other types of inspiration, probably there's another aspect to doing live performance because it takes its toll on you, right? It's demanding on your own ego and your own sense of self-worth to stand up or sit up in front of people and play and be judged. It's what we do. It's the nature of it. Yeah. You have to get a thick skin. And growing up, I had a sister with a severe mental disability, mental handicap, and it really helped and was quite inspiring because I saw, sort of what she had to deal with, and what my family had to deal with, something like that. And it really helped me. Anytime sort of things get a little overwhelming in life, and especially on a career on the violin, really gives me a tremendous sense of perspective. That at the end of the day, it's just a piece of music. It's just a scale. It's just a note. Nobody gets harmed in the making of it, and it puts perspectives it puts problems into perspective. So, that's something that's perhaps a more personal inspiration and then more of a performance inspiration.
I think that is a very important source of inspiration, and what you said about, like it's just a piece of music, right? It's let bygones be bygones. Sometimes you make a mistake, but that's okay as long as you improve and you don't beat yourself up over it. And yeah, I think that's a very, very valuable lesson. So now we're going to move on to the speed round. You can answer these questions super quickly. Okay. And the first one is chamber music or orchestral music?
Chamber music.
No questions asked.
No hesitation.
None at all.
Have you ever played a viola?
Yes, I do, and most of that's just to you be able to use the special parking. No, I actually own a viola.
Nice.
Would you ever consider busking, or have you ever busked before?
I have. Would I do it again? I hope not, but certainly done that, and I've paid my dues. Yes.
Wow. Was it like fun?
Yeah, I mean, it had a certain charm to it. You know what? I'm certainly not a snob about it. Playing is playing. You know, whether it's in front of people casually walking by, or could be at a wedding or a reception, or whether it's at a, if it's in Carnegie Hall, what's the difference? None at all. People need to listen to it, and hopefully they appreciate it. So I'm not a snob. Having said that, it can be a little bit tiresome standing on a platform or something and playing like that. So I'm getting a little old to want to do that again.
Yeah.
But would I do it again? Hopefully not, but you never know.
Okay. Did you ever have to learn piano as a kid?
Ooh. So as I said earlier, I mean, I came from a family that, my parents were tremendously supportive. I mean, really, they are, talk about inspiration. But we did not have very much money. I borrowed a violin until my second or third year of university. No, beyond that. Yeah, I mean, I just didn't even own a violin. We didn't have a lot of money. So we didn't have a piano, although in my own studio, I still have a keyboard here that a friend helped me secure from Yamaha. The thing must be about 40 years old, 30 years old now. And that's how I had to learn up to grade 6 piano to get my ARCT. So I started piano lessons, got a little bit of help from somebody that cut me a huge break on piano. I went into school early to get access to a real piano because this poor keyboard didn't quite have the range. I did my grade 6 piano in about 6 or 7 months, got it, and then figured I was the anti-talent of the piano, and the world was much better off with me not near a keyboard. And aside from university, where you do have to do keyboard harmony and things like that, I try to stay away from it because it's a dangerous place for me to be. I still have to use it because, and the reason it's beside me in my studio now, I do have to do a lot of conservatory exams. Most of those are online right now, and we need a keyboard. But heaven help me, if it's more than a couple of notes, it exceeds my abilities very quickly.
I can relate.
Funny that you mentioned not touching piano. So if you could play any other instrument apart from the violin and the piano, I'm assuming, what would it be?
Well, I already play viola, as I said. Probably cello. I think a lot of violinists kind of have a little bit of cello envy in them. There's just that depth and richness. Of course, I stick with the violin because the violin is simply the best instrument that was ever created on Earth and always will be. It is the emperor of all. But the one thing it might be lacking is just, you miss that richness. So sometimes, you're playing chamber music or you're listening to a particular passage and you hear a cello or cello section or something, you just hear this real depth and richness. It's like a great chocolate or something, and like, wow, I wish my instrument could. Oh yeah, it can't. Oh well. So maybe a cello.
Yeah, I certainly have cello envy sometimes. I think it's just an incredible instrument. But then I think they don't always get the melody, so perhaps violin is still
of course
superior.
It has to be the violin. Yeah, there's no question of its superiority. I'm trying to offend as many people with that comment as possible.
And our final question, it's a very controversial one, actually. Do you pour milk or cereal first?
Oh, the cereal first.
Okay, great. I absolutely agree with that.
It's part of the natural order.
It just makes sense. It's the most intuitive order.
How do you know how much milk to pour if you don't know how much cereal you have?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. All right.
Yeah, so that concludes our interview with you. Thank you again for your time. This was incredibly insightful, inspiring, very informative. And I think that I speak for both Isabelle and I, but we have really learned a lot from this conversation with you, and your musical journey has been nothing short of incredible. So thank you for sharing this with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wow, what Corey Gemmell said about his musical journey really made me reflect on my own playing as well. And I think that it was such a very valuable experience to be able to speak with him and for our listeners to hear about how his journey eventually led to his professional career.
Ditto. After that refreshing conversation, let's move on to an amazing recording. was pretty cornery.
What even is
You know what
corner?
else is cornery?
That makes absolutely no sense.
Bassoon corner with Grace.
Okay, well, you know what was really cringy? That joke.
Oh.
Hello everyone, this is Grace Chu and welcome back to Bassoon Tunes Feature and Facts. I hope you enjoyed the opening bassoon piece called Os Cinco Compreneo, composed by Pisanguinha in 1960 and later on arranged for the bassoon. I just love the timbre of the bassoon in this piece. Before we move on from the bassoon basics, I forgot to mention that the 4 feet 5 inches instrument is also unique for the tiny double-reeded mouthpiece it uses that is just over 2 inches. Since the bassoon is one of the few double-reeded instruments along with the oboe, they're often confused for each other. But what really sets the bassoon apart is its large size and huge range. The bassoon is able to play notes from over 3 octaves. Now for the origin of the bassoon's name. As weird as it may sound, one of the original names for the bassoon was fagotto, which means a bundle of sticks in Italian. Later on, the English name bassoon derived from a French word basson, and it came from a more general term referring to the bass register, since the bassoon can play quite low. But it was really only after Henry Purcell's call for a bassoon in the piece Dioclesian that the word bassoon began to be used to refer to this particular instrument. Time is up, but thank you so much for joining Bassoon Tunes today. I hope you learned something new and stay tuned for the next Bassoon Tunes Feature and Facts, where we will take a look at popular bassoon tunes and ensembles that they play in. Please enjoy the rest of this excerpt from Thomas Dunhill's Lyric Suite Movement 2, and I'll see you bassoon!
I think that while not everyone may agree that you're the comedy queen, we can agree that we had a truly wonderful episode. We got to hear from our peers, our very lovely friends from the AU Strings class, and we got to hear from, their opinions about koalas.
Very important. Always need to know that.
Always need to know, because it says so much about a person. And of course, whether or not they have played viola and whether or not they hate the viola is also a great indicator of whether someone is a good human being. Exactly.
I'm just glad that we got to talk to our special features. It was nice to hear them.
Yeah, it was so great getting Mr. Corey Gemmell on the call.
We love strings in this house, if you cannot tell.
Yep, and none other than me to completely boast about our strings people.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to the end of our episode.
See you next month
in the music hall.
This episode was brought to you by the Period 1 Senior Musicianship class and is hosted by Wang and Isabelle Lin. Produced by Sam DeLisandro and Victoria Chow and written by Carolyn Zhu, Ivory and Jeshan and Anand. Music by Daniel Dai, Chris Chiu, and Crystal Young. Edited by Manny Pawa, Chris Tai, Sara Ko, and Brandon Will. English features by Joyce Shu, Rebecca Shu, and Lucas Vela. Special thanks to our guests Abigail Poon, Christine Wang, Alpha Leo, Victoria Chow, and Corey Gemmell. This is a work of art. Names, characters, businesses, events, and incidents are the products of the music program. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, actual events, or actual companies is purely coincidental, totally not intentional. Base view.